Hey, deserving listeners, this is my final word episode for Love is Blind Season 7, and I spent a lot of time thinking and taking notes as to what I might say in this final word episode. I thought about each couple, and I thought about all of what we saw on the show and also in the post-season interviews. I looked at my notes, and I feel a lot more satisfied with my speculations with this season because a lot of data was given not only on the show, but in the post-season interviews and whatnot. And a lot of detail was given to us about the individuals' childhoods, or at least some detail. Usually I'm just completely shooting in the dark when it comes to speculating about conceptualizations. Now, of course, I am not diagnosing these individuals. I'm not even presenting what I would consider to be viable conceptualizations about these individuals, because when I am assessing and speculating and conceptualizing and diagnosing in my clinical practice, particularly when it comes to personality disorders, I am assessing over the span of weeks, if not months. I have the luxury to do that in my practice. Plus, it's based on an edit. It's based on what they choose to disclose in post-season interviews. It's also based on allegations about each other. But it does give us an opportunity to learn about psychology and about personality and about relationships and attachment and communication and bonding and all these things that I talk about, and personality disorders as well. I don't know, but this could be recency bias, but I feel like this show, this season, actually provided the most opportunity for us to have a jumping off point to talk about a lot of really important things. And the whole episode is just going to be for members of the YouTube channel. But there will be a free portion that I will be looking at one of the couples. And I thought we'd start with Nick and Hannah. And we're going to watch a clip from their fight that they had after the party. Let's watch this clip.
Best friend in the world. Why don't you go and ask her what happened?
Because
why are you
you're
asking
my
me?
fiance. It's annoying. Were you guys talking about how fucking fabulous I am, or were you fucking talking about your past relationships?
Mature enough at this age?
Are you mature enough, Nick? Because I taught you fucking everything that you fucking know. I turned into a boy into a fucking man.
Okay, so the reason why I'm picking this clip is because I think it is emblematic of a lot that I'm going to talk about. Of course, I'm not saying anything about her, and even if Hannah were to be watching right now, what I would tell her is to not take anything I'm saying as a replacement for an in-person assessment. I'm only using this information to educate people about what this could be so that in your personal life, or if you do this yourself, then it gives you something to think about and maybe bring to your own therapist or clinician. But I thought that this clip presented something that we saw in other moments, and I can only speculate as to what is going on with her emotionally in this moment. We see her behavior, we hear her words, we can listen to the verbatim of her sentences, but that is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is going on. Or you could say it's the end of a flow chart of a lot of things that are happening for her internally, things that she's processing, things that she's observing, things she's interpreting, traumas that she's had, needs that she has in the moment. So in this moment, I would speculate that she was worried that she would be humiliated and abandoned and hurt by Nick, because at the party he was talking to Katie for a while. We don't know exactly. She said something like 40 minutes or something, but it was a while. We saw a portion of that conversation on the show, and it was, friendly. And so we could imagine that Hannah or anyone in her shoes would have a little bit of concern there. And so when they got back from the party, she was still processing those feelings, and she started going after Nick, and he was defending himself. I talked about when I was watching this scene that he could have said a lot of things differently that could have helped her. I wouldn't blame him for that, but I am always talking about both sides because I'm a couple therapist, and so everyone can do their part to reduce conflict, and there were some things that he could have done. But without that, she launches into the statement of, I've taught you everything you know, and I've made you from a boy into a man. She says that really quick. I'm just speculating, but I'm guessing what was happening in the moment is she was both worried about being abandoned. She was also, I think, worried about being humiliated. I think she has that theme in her reactivity of being humiliated and being disrespected while she's being watched, right? With the ducks situation, that was in a public scenario. Of course, they're being filmed. When they're at the party, that was also a public venue. And I think that she has this worry or this trauma around being rejected and maybe ridiculous, being made to feel ridiculous, maybe in her family. I don't have any data on that, of course. But I think that it's not just worries of abandonment, as anyone would feel in that moment, but also I think there's this theme of humiliation and of being made to look ridiculous or made to look lesser or something, because she uses this word respect a lot. And the way that she uses it in context, it seems to mean that she wants her boyfriend, Nick, to show to the world that he is not being disrespectful to her. For a lot of people in Hannah's shoes, when Nick went over to ride the ducks, they wouldn't interpret it as being humiliating or disrespectful. But I think because her trauma around this is so prominent in her interpretations and her perceptions, that any opportunity to interpret things that way will be interpreted that way. And then it feels very hurtful. And then her way of coping with that feeling is to go on the attack and to make sure that she is known as the superior one, not in the narcissistic sense, but in the sense that I'm more mature, I'm not ridiculous, you're the ridiculous one, and I'm going to make sure that everyone knows that I'm smart, I'm responsible, you're the irresponsible one. So when he says, can't we be more mature, how she interpreted it, which I think is rational for her to interpret it this way, is because I'm jealous or I'm displaying jealousy or I'm upset about this, Nick, you're calling me immature because of that, right? And then that's a trigger for her, and she overreacts in a way that she wouldn't normally, because I don't think when she's just chilling that she has these kinds of overt thoughts. Typically when we're at our worst in conflict with our partner, we will say and think things that we would never think or say. They're in there kind of. There's lesser versions, more attenuated versions of those. And of course, I'm generalizing. There's a lot of different permutations of this. But anyway, so he is saying, you're immature for being jealous about this. She's scrambling. There's also an element during this conversation of, don't you understand me, Nick? She's not effective in communicating her feelings in this, but I think there's a theme also of people don't get me, they don't understand me. And we often feel that when we're in conflict with anyone, particularly our spouses, because these are the people typically we want to understand us the best, the most. So when she gets triggered in that way, then she has to establish that. And we have seen that a number of times where she will make sure that it's established that he's immature, she's mature, he's irresponsible, she's super responsible, he's maybe dumb. I don't know. It seems to have that kind of element to it. And she's smart. She knows how to do things and he doesn't. And so that's what she does in a really overt, silly way. Even he, right after this, will start to he's like, what did you do? You've turned me from a boy to a man. What is happening? And that's the nature of defenses. It's the nature of personality disorders. It will shoot us in the foot because we need it to be true so badly that we will display behavior that is obviously out of bounds, right? Okay, so keep all that in mind as we look at the data on the show. So in the pods, we saw that she liked both Nick and Leo, and other women were in the lounge convincing her to break up with Nick because he was seen as a player, a Rico Suave, this sort of thing. I'm unclear as to exactly why others were trying to get her to break up with Nick, either to protect her or because they thought that he was sleazy or he was fake or he was going to hurt her because he's a player. Or I don't know, but they convinced, and there were at least a couple scenes where Hannah was frustrated with how much people were trying to pressure her. She'd be like, hey, I like him. But in the end, she broke up with Nick due to this pressure or convincing her or something. Nick left the pods, Hannah learned that Brittany and Leo were connecting. So we don't know what was going through her mind, but by the edit, I think we're supposed to believe that Hannah was worried that she was not going to go home with anyone because Brittany and Leo were connecting. And then she asked Nick to come back, but she still had Leo as her number one, and Nick was clearly a number two. But then she eventually breaks up with Leo, and maybe because she was worried that she was going to get dumped by Leo for Brittany. But anyway, eventually she tells Leo that she doesn't want to be with him. Leo freaked out, if you remember that scene, and he pressured her to change her mind, even though he was still debating himself between Brittany and Hannah. But Hannah did not react well to this, as is understandable, and she was turned off by this, and so she continued to break up with Leo, and then she chose to be with Nick. Okay, so that's what happened in the pods. And then after, we can look at other key moments. We have this moment where she says, "I taught you everything you know. I turned you from a boy into a man." She would often make sure that it was understood that he wasn't mature enough, that she was there to teach him. They talked about that explicitly. She would talk about how she had more experience, she was more responsible, she knew how to manage money, she knew how to manage a career, she knew how to clean, she knew how to do chores around the house, she knew how to take care of a dog. He didn't know how to do any of these things. She's smarter than him. He's disrespectful. And then there's that other scene where he was asking to be treated like an equal, and she said, "I'll treat you like an equal when you act like an equal." Also, during the reunion, she said that, "Oh, I'm just direct, even though I'm right and I'm telling the truth, but I need to be a little nicer about the truth," which was not received well by me or the audience because it didn't look that way. She ridiculed him in front of her friends. In the edits, we don't know. Maybe outside of the edit, there was more supportive or more loving gestures toward Nick in front of her friends and in front of her brother, by the way. We can imagine that wasn't likely happening, but we don't know. We also learned that after the reunion that they had sex. She disclosed that at the reunion. Well, he disclosed that they got together, that they met up socially, and then she disclosed, or Marissa told or something, that they had sex at this point. I don't know what that says, but it's a detail. We also saw at the reunion that she came with ammunition, seemingly. She had a number of bullet points ready to go, none of which really landed well. I mean, if you listen to her tone of voice, or if you assume that what she's saying is 100% accurate, then it comes across like it's damning information for Nick. But when you think about it, you're like, well, wait, what? How is that damning of him? How does that indicate anything negative about him? Like, one of the pieces of ammo that she had at the reunion was, she said something like, women are reaching out to me, telling me and showing me screenshots of your text with them, saying that you were going to fly a woman out to the reunion. And she is saying that because she was trying to make the point that he was not there genuinely. And he might not have been, which I'll get to in a second when we talk about him. But she was trying to make that point. But when you think about what she's saying that a woman who was presumably talking with Nick, making Nick believe that Nick was actually interacting with someone who was genuinely flirting with him, right? And then he said, "Hey, if you'd like to meet up, I'll fly you out for the reunion and we can meet up." And then something happened, who knows, but the woman decided to not do that. And then she takes a screenshot and then she sends it to Hannah for some reason, right? So now maybe this other woman was a plant. That'll happen sometimes, right? The other woman could be a troll. The other woman could be catfishing. The other woman could have learned something about Nick that turned her off, and then she decided to try to get back at him or something, or warn Hannah. I don't know. There's just a lot of possibilities. But the detail that Hannah gives, it doesn't really say anything other than the possibility that this other woman is a problem as well. The other detail that she came to the reunion with is that she found in his journal that he had 3 goals. One was to have a better career, to do better in sales. Another was to work out more or something. And then the third one was to be the most famous person on Love is Blind. And, that could be a lot of different things. Some of them innocent, some of them not. But she came ready for it. And at the reunion, Nick didn't come with any ammunition. He either was just defending himself or was being nice to her. So who knows what that means, but, just other behavior that we saw regarding Hannah. If we review the different scenes that are notable regarding possibly revealing something about her personality and her defenses, there are several. We have the ducks scene, the list scene when he discovered her list, Delulu, that kind of thing. The scene after the party, which is this scene. The rock climbing talk scene. The scene with her friends, the scene of them breaking up on the couch, and then at the reunion. There's a lot there. Each of these scenes has a theme to them and other details. We also heard sprinkled in throughout the season details about her childhood, tiny little details, but illuminating, right? So let's talk about childhood. She said that she was cut off at 18. We don't know what that means. It could mean a lot of different things, but typically what that means is that there was conflict between her and her parents, either because everyone was being a jerk face or the parents were being jerk faces, bad parents, abusive parents, or she was presenting some kind of problem that the parents weren't to blame for in the moment, but the parents were possibly responsible for creating the monster, if you will. I mean, not monster, but, that the parents parented Hannah in a way when she was young that resulted in her having a personality and or defenses that resulted in her as a teenager being a very challenging teenager. That would happen for me, seemingly. I couldn't know because I didn't have a time machine, but I would have families that would come to me with defiant teenagers, and when I would assess the situation in the moment, I would see the parents weren't doing anything out of bounds and the child was. But then I would learn more detail and learn that the parents parented that child in a way that actually set the stage for that problem as the child entered their teenage years. So, we don't know. But we did hear that she was cut off when she was 18. And that's a particular way of phrasing it, right? It's not that she learned how to be responsible when she was, she was cut off. We don't know what that means, but, it says something. Then we also heard her say that her mother had locked up food so Hannah would not have access to it. It's hard to know what this means, but there's a wide range of possibilities. On one end of the spectrum, you have Hannah was caught getting into the snack drawer when she was 5, and the parents were concerned that it would be a pattern or something, and so they just took those snacks and put them somewhere where she wouldn't have access to them, and they did that for a week, and Hannah's sneaking out, and kids will do this sometimes. They'll wake up in the middle of the night and go look around, or when the parents aren't looking, they'll, and there's various reasons, some of them pathological, some of them not, some of them concerning, some of them not. So on one end of the spectrum, you just have this non-concerning, non-problematic, non-pathological, temporary behavior from Hannah that a lot of kids will do sometimes, and the parents took, minimal efforts to prevent Hannah from getting access to that. It's probably not that end of the spectrum, but, we don't know. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the mom, because she said her mom was the one that locked up the snacks, that the mom comes from a childhood in which she has tremendous body image traumas and food and eating and feeding traumas as well, or some combination of those things. And she retained those traumas and reactivity and distortions and perceptions into her adult life and proceeded to parent Hannah in relation to those distortions and perceptions and desperations and traumas. And as a part of that, she had a whole suite of problematic messages and parenting approaches to both of her kids, but maybe particularly Hannah because she's a girl. And this resulted in a whole suite of behaviors that would be a problem, and one of which was referenced by Hannah when she says that her mother used to lock up the food. Maybe did that throughout Hannah's childhood, would give messages to Hannah that she wasn't good enough or that she eats too much even though Hannah's 3 years old and eating normally, or that Hannah needs to watch her weight because she's getting a little fat when she's like 7 years old. These are common enough experiences and traumas, and it gets passed down through the generations, as I was talking about, and this is all speculative based on a tiny little thing that Hannah said, or it's something in between, something in between just this innocent 1 week thing that the parents did, or an all-encompassing, horrific, traumatizing parenting approach, or something in between, or something askew from that. So we don't know. But if I heard this from a client, I would ask a lot of questions that would get more information, but we don't have the luxury to do that. Another thing that we saw was the scene with her parents. And at first, I thought that there wasn't anything notable in particular. I mean, there were some things that were notable, kind of, but I, at that point, didn't highlight them because there wasn't enough information yet. That scene with the parents must have been early on or something. Anyway, but looking back, again, this is highly speculative, and I don't want to throw the parents I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but the parents could have been a little standoffish. Their approach was, I think I might have contrasted this at the time, that different families will react differently to the prospect of their child, their adult child, getting married on or getting engaged on a reality TV show after only meeting someone for a couple weeks. Because by the time they see them after the getaway, they might have known their partner for 2 or 3 weeks or something. And for anyone, they're gonna think you're going to get married in a month to a person you met just a few weeks ago. What's happening right now? And people are going to be concerned. You'll see different reactions. Some people will be extremely concerned and judgmental to the point where they don't even want to come on the show or they don't want to go to the wedding. Or you'll see people like Hannah's parents that are just like, hey, I trust you, and if this is what you want to do, then go for it. I don't think this is wise, but it's not my life. If you feel like you're in love and you feel like this is a good person, then I will absolutely support you. So I thought that they were more in that camp, but when I thought about their reactivity or their behavior towards her at that dinner, they were more like, hey, it's your life and do what you want. And I don't know, but given these other details that we heard, being cut off at 18, this kind of stuff, that maybe the parents eventually adopted due to a lot of conflict and chaos, maybe throughout the family. And again, it's all speculative, but I wouldn't be surprised given the little details that we heard, particularly that cut off at 18 statement. But there's a possibility that they were a lot more involved with Hannah, but eventually they learned that if they get involved, it'll create conflict and chaos, maybe even between the parents. And so they've learned to just be as distant as possible and be pleasant and be there, but don't get into it with her. Don't talk about her decisions. Don't criticize her because it'll cause either her to get upset or will get upset or something bad will happen. So there seemed to be some kind of rawness or some kind of fear in what the parents were saying. I don't know. It's completely me just reading into it, but it is something to think about. Also, we saw the scene with the brother in which he said that Hannah can dish it out. I'm paraphrasing, but he was saying that Hannah can dish it out, but she can't take it, meaning that she can be mean and cruel and critical and playfully critical, but if you do it back to her, then she will get really upset. So that's interesting, right? Because it looked like her and her brother had a good relationship. So for him to say that to Nick with so little prompting, I think means something, right? Because we don't usually see that. We don't usually see family members criticize their family member to their fiance, right? And I don't know what that means, but given what we saw from Hannah, we can imagine what that might mean for the brother. So the other thing we saw at the dinner with the parents was that the mom said that Hannah will often nitpick men and break up with them, I think. Yeah, but she mentioned that she will often nitpick. And also the mom would tell Hannah, hey, you just need to relax, calm down. Or, whoa, what did you just do? Everyone close to Hannah, except for the friends, right? But the mom and the brother were on it. If you just look at all the interactions, the important key moments, they were more supportive of Nick without really knowing Nick at all. Because with Nick, when you meet him, I'm guessing that you don't feel like you really know who he is because he comes across as not super spontaneous or genuine, as evidenced by the reaction to him in the pods. Now, he could be genuine. I don't know if he's lying or anything. We'll get into that in a second, but I don't think he's comfortable enough. Or I don't know if he knows who he is. Again, we'll get into that in a second. But so the fact that the brother and the mom were seemingly defending Nick against Hannah, it says something. Because I don't think we usually see that. I think it says that there's a lot going on in their history, but who knows? All right, so here's my top hypothesis if someone like Hannah were to enter therapy with me. I would hypothesize that she had a fair amount of childhood trauma related to the following experiences: being made to grow up too fast, being made to feel like she's not good enough, particularly when it comes to maturity or being irresponsible or childish or being unprepared. Also, it's quite possible that she was not modeled how to be humble and self-aware. I don't know that, of course, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'm also speculating that there was a fair amount of family conflict and chaos throughout her childhood, or at least enough that it was not a stable and secure experience for her growing up, which resulted in her maybe even being elected in the family system to be the truth teller and the direct one, maybe scapegoated, who knows? And that resulted in mounting and building conflict with her eventually being kicked out. Maybe even she wanted to move out because she wanted to prove that she could do it on her own. We could imagine that, right? There's a lot of roads to that. And or there was a particularly enmeshed relationship between Hannah and her mom that resulted in a lot of difficulty and chaos. Again, it's just pure speculation. I wouldn't be surprised if Hannah presented as a fairly defiant teenager in some way, either with attitude or her behavior or something, and then that resulted in the parents having to draw a boundary with her at 18, either out of desperation because Hannah was presenting a lot of problematic behavior. Maybe Hannah was even saying, I'm going to be responsible, stop putting rules on me. I don't know, we could see that happening. But anyway, either the parents were reacting to a very defiant Hannah, or the parents are overly judgmental. Given what we saw from Hannah, there could be a possibility that the parents expected way too much of Hannah. And when she was, say, 16 years old, the parents expected her to be responsible like she was 35 or something. And as a part of this, the parents were telling her that she's immature and she's irresponsible. And so Hannah adjusted to this by trying to be even more responsible. So that's all speculative based on very little information, but it seems clear, given her behavior on the show, if it's genuine and edited in a way that is representative of her personality and behavior, I wouldn't be surprised if she has a schema in which she believes that she is immature, that she is irresponsible, and that she is not good enough. The way that she presents is someone that has an overcompensation for that internal belief about herself. So when it comes to having a schema in which you are made to feel like, look, it's just innate. It's a law of the universe that I am immature, I'm irresponsible, I'm not good enough. There are 3 different styles of coping with a schema like this. One is to surrender and say, you know what, I'm irresponsible. Like, think of Brittany. We don't know, but the way that she presented was she was very frequently signaling that she's not smart and she needs to find someone that will take care of her financially. And that was just a foregone, there was no debate about that. She is not smart and she is not capable of taking care of herself financially. So there's a possibility that for Brittany, she had a similar, but, a little different messaging that made her believe that she is irresponsible, she's not smart, and she's not good enough. And a surrendering to that belief is to say, I'm just going to lean into it, I'm going to display it, and I'm going to find someone to take care of me. There's another style, which is overcompensating for that schema, which is to put a lot of effort into making sure that you are over-responsible and overly mature, and making sure everyone else around you, by contrast, is less mature and less responsible, because then that reassures the self that you're responsible, because you're constantly running away from this inherent belief that you are irresponsible and you're immature and you're not good enough. Meanwhile, all of your efforts make you feel like you're running away from that notion, but you're not. You're just running on a treadmill. So that's overcompensation, and then there's surrendering, and then there's avoiding is another style that you can cope with a schema like that, which would maybe be just avoiding relationships or avoiding situations in which your maturity or responsibility is even brought into question. So when I look at her behavior, because it seems so adamant that she is mature, she is responsible, and that Nick is immature, irresponsible. She has taught him everything that he knows. She has changed him from a boy into a man. She will treat him as an equal when he proves that he is an equal. It's so overt and so silly, really. It's so out of left field. It's so over the top, right? That it looks like she has a desperate need to establish this to be true, even to herself. Why would someone do that? Now, one of the hypotheses, and there are many others, but the possibility is that she believes the opposite about herself, and she's overcompensating for that belief. Then you think, well, if that's true, then why would she have that belief about herself? Well, it's being treated in a certain way when you were growing up, right? And then you hear that detail of cut off at 18 and snacks being hidden by you, and you look at the behavior at the dinner, and you think about the possibilities that could have been happening when they were growing up, and there seems to be a through line. There's enough there anyway to inquire as a therapist if I had a client that presented this way. So if this is close to the mark, what could Hannah do to change this, to improve on this? Well, the two-pronged approach that I find to be common to most, if not all, therapies is self-awareness and corrective experiences. So with self-awareness, that requires investigation and exploration and feedback from others, and working out with a therapist that you trust enough to hold you and contain your emotions and to not reject you while that therapist says, let's look at this. And you might even use the relationship between the therapist and the client to highlight certain things about their reactivity and, the client's assumptions and the way that they see the world, the way they see themselves. So there's self-awareness, which can help in the moment, right? To be like, oh, I'm having this feeling and that could mean this. And what's really happening for me is probably this hidden feeling. And let me look at that. And how do I process that? But that doesn't take away the reactivity. It doesn't take away the schema that is likely present. That requires a corrective experience, which is more long-term. And that could look like in therapy, the relationship between the therapist and the client would be intense enough to be important in the client's life and felt by the client, and it would be felt by the therapist as well, that the relationship would have moments in which this question would be raised. Am I good enough? Am I mature? Am I responsible? Am I rejectable? Am I okay? And when those questions are brought up emotionally and maybe even explicitly, the question is answered in a way that makes the client feel like they are good enough and that they are mature enough. Or another way of putting it is, even though I am immature at times, does that mean I'm good enough? Even though I am irresponsible at times, am I still okay? Do I still receive unconditional positive regard or unconditional love? And that's a hard thing to establish, right? There's a lot that needs to happen in therapy. It usually takes a while for the relationship to become intense enough. It requires a therapist to understand what's happening and to have a theoretical orientation background in which they understand how to detect these kinds of schemas or these kinds of interjects. And they also understand corrective experiences. They also have to understand their own countertransference. It's really hard because when you're interacting with people that have these kind of schemas, they will use through transference and displacement and projective identification, they will make the therapist comply, or they'll try to make the therapist comply with the projective identification, which could involve a therapist actually judging her. If you think about the way that we all react, or I'll just think about for myself, but you could also imagine a lot of people having this reaction, that when we watch Hannah, we actually look at her and say, she's immature. She's irresponsible. She is a jerk face, right? There's a problem with her. And if you were to interact with her as a therapist, you could imagine that you might start to feel that way, right? Especially if you saw them as a couple, right? Well, there's a possibility that her internal defenses are such that she is running away from this notion that she is immature. And the way that she processes that pain is by inducing the feeling in others to recreate her past, which is to have someone from the outside telling her that she's immature. Meanwhile, she's enacting that feeling of, I'm more mature, I am mature, you're immature. But in the process of it all, it ends up backfiring, and but it's unconsciously. Listen to all my episodes on projective identification. I hope this all makes sense. It probably doesn't. But in a nutshell, projective identification typically involves an internalized, repetitive, intense, negative experience we had growing up. So you have a critical other saying, I'm better than you, you're immature, and then this person feeling like they're immature, but they're hurt and they're angry about being made to feel this way. Then that gets repeated, and then that becomes a persistent aspect of their personality, this dyad, this internal strife, and then they end up having a voice inside their mind of like, you're immature. Am I immature? Am I worthless? I feel like I'm being mistreated. Yeah, and it's very conflictual, and it's very busted up on the inside. The person doesn't know what to do with it, so they recreate it externally, and they identify with one side or the other. And so you will find someone that you can call immature. So she might have even been attracted to Nick because of that reason. Then you proceed to induce the other person to feel immature and also to feel unfairly criticized. And the way you do that is by doing what we saw, right? Meanwhile, you think you're the mature one and Nick is the immature one. Yet from the outside, you look immature, and you're both identifying with the abuser by acting like the abuser, by telling the other person you're immature unfairly and putting the other person down unfairly. But you're also acting from a place of the victim of that dyad, where you're the struggling, immature one that's self-sabotaging. Does that make sense? Meanwhile, you're trying to find someone that you can do this with fairly easily. This is all unconscious. And you're inducing the other person to feel that way, right? So it's all the above. That's projective identification. So, we could imagine there being something like that with Hannah. All right, so that's Hannah. Now let's go on to Nick. And I've yet to also get to all the other couples, Tyler and Ashley, and Ramses and Marissa, Steven and Monica, Tim and Alex, Leo and Brittany, I guess, Garrett and Taylor. But the rest of this episode, which you could imagine is going to be quite long and involved, is for members of the YouTube channel. So if you want to see this full episode, become a member, only if you want to. Otherwise, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.